Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Bruce Museum, I'm really happy to have you to our second workshop today. We will be focusing on Emily Mason and color. I thought it would be nice to begin with an actual quote from Emily, where she says, "My work, while never a depiction of nature, is analogous in its process to the workings of nature. And in its result, it aims for the beauty of the interior of a great storm or of a daylily." What a wonderful thing to say. Um, Emily, Emily navigated both the inspirations of landscape and abstraction by creating paintings and print work, evoking atmospheric bliss through the use of color. While some wished to tie her to either the abstract expressionist or color field movements in painting, she was never really particularly so affiliated. Emily was really unrivaled as a force unto herself. She had the innate ability to engage her viewers through skill and with her eye for nuance. Now that you're becoming a little bit familiar with her work, you may notice that she created pools and puddles of color that enabled her audience to find within each of her works their own personal journey. As we know, some artists like to have an underlying message. Emily didn't have a specific message that she hoped to impart. She wanted each viewer to find their own message in her work. Oftentimes, her color palettes have been compared to the boldness of Bonnard, as we see here in this painting, The Dining Room, Vernon, in 1925. Look at these colors, and now look at this. Emily's piece of 2016 called Summer Loft. Very beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Similar palette.
And that's a print.
Yes.
Not a, wow. Okay.
And then
can we go back to Bonnard again, Nancy? Okay, thank you.
And then she was also compared to Monet. Look at this impressionist style that we all recognize of his. And this is Sunrise in 1872. So being that we all come to this workshop with a different level of experience, I'd like to briefly review some basic color mixing so that people who don't have a lot of experience have a little bit better understanding when we're talking about certain things today about color. So there are three primary colors, which are red, blue, and yellow. And then we move into a more complex color wheel, which gives us secondary colors as well. Secondary colors are created by mixing two primary colors together. So we have red plus blue, when mixed together, give you violet. Red plus yellow, when mixed together, give you orange. And blue plus yellow, when mixed, give you green. Next up on the color mixing wheel, we have what we call tertiary colors. Tertiary colors are mixed using one secondary color and one primary color, thus resulting in 6 tertiary colors. So what might those be? If you mix violet plus red, you get red violet. Violet plus blue, you get blue violet. Orange plus red, you get red orange. Orange plus yellow, you get yellow orange. Green plus yellow, you get yellow green. And green plus blue, you get blue-green. Now, one of Emily's favorite color palettes were complementary colors. Complementary colors is the term used for colors that are opposite one another on the color wheel. So if we go back to a little bit more basic color wheel, you'll notice that violet and yellow are across from one another. Red and green are across from one another. And blue and orange are across from one another. These colors were often used in her paintings and in her prints. Complementary colors create a high contrast. So generally, she would use one as more of the dominant and one as more of an accent color. And by the way, that does not mean that you have to do that. I'm just talking specifically about how she used them most often. In these examples, accent color does not necessarily mean a color that stands aside. So when we look at this piece, and I should preface this that a lot of these pieces I'm showing you are her paintings. It's easier to find them and access them. So I just want you to know that ahead of time. So here, this is called Blue Angel. This was created in 1995. And you can see here that she had a very bold use of both yellow and violet. The warmer yellow captivated the light and expressed the light in this painting. And the cooler violet and blues sit back in the shadow. But how interesting that she really didn't use a lot of yellow here, did she? The majority of it is the cooler color. But yet those little snippets of that bold yellow just really reacted quite nicely and gave this painting a lot of life. Again, the complements there, yellow and violet. Okay, so in this piece, red and fuchsia are working with a push-pull against a small yet mighty wall of turquoise green. The turquoise, albeit a very small part of this work, really holds its own against this vast majority of color to its right. This is called Aegean.
And again, painting, not print, right?
I believe so. When researching her, I don't personally have a lot of textbooks on her, so I'm relegated to what I can find online. So sometimes they're not identified one way or another. Some of her early prints were experimental and different from her later work. And so I'm really kind of focusing on the work that she became known for, because I think these are the things that really exemplify who she was. Like many artists, they go through various different stages in their life, depending upon location, depending upon experimentation. And, you know, these are the types of pieces that she was known for. And I might add, as a painter and printmaker myself, that anything that can be painted can also be printed for the most part.
Those reds and pinks are, the effect is very pleasing, even though they are not complementary colors.
Yes, yes. Now going back to a more bold complementary, this is called Took to the Sky, done in 2016. This does hint at the landscape a little bit, as she used the turquoise blue and the orange, creating a bold path to the sky, seemingly with the orange, while the turquoise, which was the majority of the canvas, really ended up playing second fiddle to that bold, warm, complementary swath of orange. Not dissimilar, I might say, to the first piece that I showed you, with the violet and the yellow. It doesn't take a lot. And if you'll notice, some of the area in the sky there, some of those whites were created by deleting ink, which is something that we haven't talked about yet.
You mean deleting ink on the plexiglass or on the paper?
Yes,
On the
yes, on the plexiglass.
Ink, not paint.
I beg your pardon?
Ink, not paint. Deleting ink,
Not
paint.
I personally, as a printmaker, use etching ink. Many printmakers I know use paint, oil paint, and etching ink. Some just use oil paint. It depends on what result you want and what your pocketbook can yield. Etching inks are very expensive, and many times artists may use oil paints instead because it affords them the ability to purchase more. So Emily became enchanted with analogous color usage after she worked with Jack Lenore Larson. Does anyone know his work? Jack Lenore Larson. He's a legendary textile designer. There's actually a place in the Hamptons that he created a foundation out there, and it's gardens and sculptures, and you can go into the museum, sort of a museum that was set up there. He only just passed away. He only just recently passed away in December. It's closed right now, but hopefully after COVID it would reopen. But anyway, she met him in North Carolina at Haystack, which is a very famous school for fine craft. A lot of painters and other fine artists wanted to go to Haystack and study with different artists of different mediums to learn different things. As we all tend to do, we can take from one thing and sometimes apply it to another. Like Martha said to us earlier today that she does a lot of sewing and a lot of her work is textile based. So, with Martha's investigation into printmaking, I'm sure that there will be some things that she will find useful either in her sewing or some of her sewing ideas that she could bring to her printmaking. But one thing that Jack introduced her to was really a life-changing notion about color. And this was really a turning point when he talked to her about analogous color. And I will quote her. She said, "He talked about analogous color and changed my perception. I'm indebted to him for opening my eyes because analogous colors, yellow, orange, orange, yellow, and orange, for example, are analogous, which means that they are next to one another on the color chart. So instead of using black or white to modify my paint color, I will use the shade next to it on the color wheel. It's more how the eye naturally sees color." So using analogous palettes very quickly became her favorite. And that's going to be the focus of these next pieces. So this is Blue Flag, created in 2014. And here in this painting, she deferred to the cooler side of the spectrum, using cerulean and cobalt and periwinkle blues with minty and turquoise greens. Something very soothing about the analogous palettes, isn't there?
Mm.
In this piece here, Sunnyside, created in 2016, Sunnyside really breeds light and it leaves you with this uplifted feeling. This is a non-structured work where the color seemingly just floats into an explosion of happy light. This piece called Rush Hour is subtle, yet it's very effective in its use of fuchsia, red, and red orange with that small little shot of a bolder yellow orange as an accent. And when you get up closer, you can see some of the, there's an edge for you, my friend, Martha.
Yeah. It's very cool.
So as you can tell, just by looking at this one, for example, there is color placed over color here. This piece, equally bold, is called Annealed. This was created in 2014 and it showcases red, red violets, and red orange with this smashing dash of turquoise, which was very carefully placed for maximum effect. Now, as we get closer on this one, you'll see, in fact, you can see right here a brush stroke. Do you see this brush stroke here?
Mhm.
I'll get my little tool out.
Covering some blue.
Can you see that brush stroke right there?
Yes.
Yep.
So clearly that was placed over top of what was underneath it. And if we go along and we examine this a little further, you can see this area here which is just kind of randomly textured, isn't it? I would venture to guess that here, perhaps, she used something like a paper towel or something like a dauber to add some white over top of what was existing. Here we have some additional texture right there. It's quite possible, although I cannot confirm, but it is quite possible that she waited for this piece to dry and then used some pastel right there on top of it.
Mm.
And then you can see here, the blue was definitely added afterwards, but the blue kept its integrity over top of the fuchsia. So you wonder, gee, how did she accomplish that? Well, I wasn't there, but how I would accomplish something like that as a printmaker is I would create a deleted area there using alcohol, and then I would brush in the color that I would want to have there. Whether or not she did it that way, I can't tell you.
There is another brush stroke that you showed on the top right, has some blue underneath.
Yes, you are right. It does. And this is a painting. So another thing to note, is that oftentimes artists may paint over paintings. They might have a painting that is just not that satisfactory to them. So they may decide to paint over it. So it's entirely possible that this was such a piece. But again, we weren't there, so we don't really know. We can only investigate.
But maybe she did it on purpose because she could have removed the blue like she removed the pink where the other blue.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that area sits back and recedes, doesn't it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here we have this lovely piece called Stump Sprout. Here again, she uses a combination of analogous colors from blue to blue-green to green to yellow-green. This one has a little bit more structure to it. But you can see here that this turquoise green was likely underneath this area on the right. And then with an overwash of the yellow, you see what happens when the colors layer over one another. Here you have a little bit more of a periwinkle blue up there. This area right here. And then below it, a little bit more of a cerulean blue. Emily did some of her paintings with brushes, but a lot of her paintings she did using mixing up little bits of paint in her cat food tins that she kept after feeding her cat. And in pictures of her studio, you'll see all these little cat food tins everywhere. And she also really liked to work on the floor. She felt it was comfortable to her. And also, if she was planning to use mediums and she was pouring some of the paint, because she made some of the paint very thin, she was able to hold it like a seesaw and move it back and forth and navigate the direction in which the pigment would go. So let's move.
The yellow edges on the left of the yellow is very crisp and defined. How did she do it? It can't be with a brush. You see what I'm saying? The yellow is very defined, the line that separates the yellow from the blue.
This piece right here.
Yeah,
that comes down there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very possible that could have been a brush. If you are using the right brush, that could definitely be a brush. She could have, it's very thin, so I don't think that she would have used a palette knife to create that. But, if you're using, say, a brand new flat brush that has a tapered edge to it, you can certainly get a crisp edge like that without a problem. It's also possible that she may have used other things on top of her paintings. I have a colleague who also works in collage, and sometimes what she does when she's pouring her paints is she'll make cut out a piece of cardboard with a certain edge, and she'll lay it down and then she'll pour the paint so that it goes against that. But I really don't think that she did that in this case. I think it's a little too contrived, and she was not about being contrived. She, you remember last week we were talking about her mother and how her mother was very structured, and went about everything that she created in a very methodical way. Well, she really didn't do that. She was more about experimentation and, seeing how things went, and then sitting back and looking at it, and then going back and making some decisions. So she was what I would call an intuitive artist, as opposed to someone who said, oh, I am going to paint this portrait of this person. In her lineage, her ancestors were much more like that. She was not like that.
I think
So
the magic is the colors, and I like those yellow splashes that give so much character to this.
yes, they're beautiful, aren't they? Beautiful. And so that's why, what I referenced earlier when I said I really wanted to focus on a certain time period of her color, because this is really who she is. So I'm happy that you have enjoyed this. So now what I'd really like to do, because we are constrained with our time today, I really would like to show you a few other ways that you can experiment with your monotypes. Now, she primarily printed through the use of an intaglio press, and she was able to create a variety of prints using things like carabundum mixed with acrylic medium, silk aquatint, which is a process whereby we use acrylic paint on top of a silk covered and treated board, solar intaglio plates, which is a non-toxic etching process. But we'll save those for post-COVID, when we can actually meet in a studio. But for now, we're going to continue to explore the ways in which you can use other materials to facilitate interesting results. And I really want you to use this as your experimentation, as your time to have some fun with this process. I mean, monotype of any of the printmaking processes is really about experimenting and having some fun. As I said in our first meeting last week, it's really considered the painterly print. So my hope for you today is that you will actively discover through the process ways that you can add to your artistic practice. So let's think of today as a materials process day. And let's not focus primarily on finished product, because as printmakers, we are very invested in process. So, hand printing yields beautiful, soft results. And what will be interesting to you is to compare all the different methodologies in the end. And I kind of like to consider printmaking as being an extension of being an archaeologist and an inventor. Every time you print, you have the opportunity to discover something that you can apply to your own personal goals as an artist. So let's dispense with the lecture and let's get moving. So if you want to take out, I would say maybe 2 colors or 3 colors that you want to use today for your first print that are analogous. That might be fun. So if you remember analogous, it's all about colors that sit next to one another on the color wheel. I have a question for you all, because I don't know of everyone's background. Is it helpful to you if I go back to the slide where I have the color wheel? Would that be something that people would want to reference? Or are you all okay with, what analogous colors are?
I have one in front of me.
Yeah, I have
I
one
don't
too.
I'm okay.
I'm
Okay. So if there's anyone that wants it, just now's your moment to shout out. Okay. So let's, let me get my, my camera focused where it needs to be focused so we can get it focused on the processing part. All right.
Nancy, do you want to remove your presentation?
Let me see if I can get a spotlight on to, hold on one second. Thank you. So is that appearing large for you now? The can you see my printing plate large?
No, we still have that
That piece?
that
Okay.
piece.
Okay.
You'll have to actually stop your presentation if you want to spotlight anything else. Yeah.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So here we go. Now we're in business. Okay. So what I would like to do first is I'm going to do a full bleed, which, as you may remember from last week, means I'm going to use the same size paper as my plate. So I'm just going to have my paper to the left over here, where I have my towel. Those of you from last week, I think, have your own setup as you chose to create it and make it comfortable for yourself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create something similar, just for a point of reference, to what we saw Emily do with her painting Took to the Sky, which was the one that had the large swath of blue on one side and then the orange pathway seemingly going up to the sky. So I am getting my ink ready here. And I think I'm going to make this, even though hers was a vertical, I think I'm going to make this a horizontal. So I'm going to come in and use my brayer here. Now, the question was asked earlier today before our class officially began is, what do you do about the brayer marks? Well, you can lessen the brayer marks by moving your brayer in one direction. You can also use your brayer marks to your advantage in creating a space. So It's up to you. So some of you may have come today with a pre-created idea of what you wanted to create. Maybe you had a little drawing. A lot of monotype artists do work with preliminary drawings, unlike Emily. So you need to do what is comfortable for you. Okay. You will be running through a ton of paper towels probably today and all sorts of things. So just to give you a heads up on that. Sometimes Emily was known to mix on her plate. So I may do a little of that for you today too. But for now, I do want a little bit lighter color for the sky, so I'm going to add a little bit of white here. And I've got my palette knife, and I'm just mixing it into what I had left on my palette pad. Now, depending on the effect you want, you can make this a solid color, or you can utilize the striations that you get by not mixing it with a palette knife. So now I'm going to add a little bit of this here. Now I think what I'm going to do, just to show you something else that you can think about, is I think I'm going to leave a little bit of plexi completely unadorned. So if you can see here, there's an area here going along that does not have a specific color there. And in fact, I'm going to take a little bit of alcohol, rubbing alcohol, and I'm going to use a Q-tip, and I'm just going to create whatever shape I might want here on my edge. So we were talking before about edges and can they be controlled? This is one way to control them. Should you decide that that's something you want to do. I don't like that hard edge right there. So I'm going to come in here and get rid of that. Now, to mix it up a little bit for you, I'm now going to take a brush And I'm going to squeeze a little bit here on my palette.
How thick should the paint be on the plexiglass? It appears
How
that you're quite thick.
how thick should it be?
Yeah,
Um,
mine's almost like transparent.
if you want it to be opaque, you know, you can make it more opaque like this. Notice here in this particular one, let me see if I can get it tilted. Okay, so you see the sky looks very opaque here.
Yeah.
That's because I added titanium white, which is an opaque white. If I had added zinc white, for example, it would not be that opaque. Now, this blue that I used, it's not as opaque as the light blue that I created. I'm trying to figure out a way for you to see this, but the light does go through it. Oh dear, hold on one second. One little moment.
Another thing, when we're putting paint on the palette paper, is there a certain amount we're supposed to be putting on, or how much do we roll it before we actually apply it to the plexiglass?
Okay. I don't like to overuse paint or ink, so I tend to start with, depending upon, you know, the size of that you're going to be working on. Like this is an 8 by 10 inch plate.
Okay.
So I would say I squeezed out probably something between, probably about the size of a nickel
Okay.
onto the plate.
Okay.
And the other thing is that different paint colors have different levels of opacity. And that's something that you just really have to learn. Some painters really like paints that are not particularly opaque because they like to glaze layers of paint. Sometimes some etching inks tend to be stiffer than oil paints. If your paint color is a little bit too thin, then you may have to do a couple of different passes to build up the color that you want, or you may have to make a different color choice.
And then you're painting with a brush directly on it.
Yes, I'm painting with a brush right here because I just want to show you.
I can't see that on the screen. Can you change the camera angle a little so we can see what you're doing?
Hold on one second. For some reason I'm seeing, oh, how's that? Can you see that now?
I don't see it. Oh, orange. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So you're just painting it on.
I'm just painting that on, yeah. Because I just want to show you the different possibilities of things that you can do.
What is the reasoning behind using a roller versus a paintbrush? Is it for no lines, or is it?
It's usually more of a challenge for most people to create a thin but effective layer of paint on their plates. You do get a much smoother result with the brayer. Then again, there are some people who are very heavy-handed with their paints, and they prefer to paint with a brush. They like that heavy-handedness, and then they also will find that using a paintbrush and using their paint heavily yields them very interesting results for hand printing specifically. When you're using an intaglio press, if your paint is too, or your ink is too thick, then you're going to get what we call the smush factor. And then everything is going to smush out on either side, and you will not have the clean image that you thought you were going to have.
Yes. Okay.
You know, it's so technique and process is so nuanced to every individual artist. And you know, there are a lot of artists that I've printed for who are very heavy-handed as painters. So I know when I'm working with them, I'm only doing hand pressing with them. I'm not going near a press because it's just who they are, and they need to put a lot of paint on there. Then there are other people that I work with who work so thinly that we end up doing multiple layers of prints, multiple plates to
Okay.
build up, you know, what they eventually hope to get.
Okay.
Okay, so this is very simple, but just from an illustration standpoint for you to see what, you know, what it looks like when you're rolling on your color, when you're using alcohol to delete an area that you want to remain specific, and by also adding in an area where you've used a brush. So keep working. I'm going to just spritz my paper, and then I'll show you the print. So if you remember, I just have a spritz bottle filled with water, and I'm spritzing one side of my paper. And whoops. Well, now we're going to have a really interesting print. We're going to have a phone print. So you can see what occurred here when my phone dropped on my plate. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a few little adaptations here, but you know, sometimes things are meant to happen for a reason. So maybe I will add a few more of these lines that came through here. Just for the heck of it. Not what I had planned, but let's just see what happens. Okay.
And you use alcohol on the Q-tip?
Yes. Okay, I think at this point I am just going to continue with this. Okay. So this is going to be placed on top. I'm going to press it down. That little debacle has gotten my ink all over me, but okay. And I'm going to take my burren. Notice I'm standing up. Once again, as I mentioned last week, this helps to give you the maximum amount of pressure here. And you can pick up one of the corners and have a little look and see how things are looking. It's not bad. I'm going to do a little bit more pressing. Okay, so I'm just going to pull this because I want to do some other things. So here you are. So actually my phone falling on the plate was not such a terrible thing. As you can see, this is our plate now. This is our print now. So you see, you do have a very specific path, and then you do have some very specific line work here. So this is a very simple design and a very simple example of using more than one color and using alcohol for deletion. So now, speaking of alcohol, I'm going to use alcohol to clean my plate. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Has anybody printed yet?
Yep.
Good. How'd you make out?
Fine. You know, each one is different. It's all fun.
Good. That's what I want to hear. Right now, it's about just experimenting and having fun. You can get serious if you choose to, you know, after you've practiced a bit. So here's what I'd like to show you next. So remember I said that if you were able to, I have to wash my hands. They're just a mess. I always keep my gloves on, except when I get ready to place my paper. So I want to get my gloves back on. It's one thing I'm sort of fussy about. Okay. So the next thing that I want to show you is what happens if you use a solvent. So, being that I already have some of the light blue here already mixed up, and I have enough left on my palette, which is not usual, but I did mix up quite a lot of it. So I am going to go ahead and put some of this here. Gonna brayer it on. don't have anything specific in mind. I'm just doing a random application here. Okay. So I'm now going to lay this over here. So what I'm thinking right now is I'm thinking I'm going to take some of that orange that I had before, and I'm just going to put a little bit here very lightly. With my brush. So if you notice, I'm not really, my intention is not to add a whole lot of paint here, but I am going to brush this part on as opposed to using the brayer. And one thing about using a brush is that, you know, you tend to show your brush marks. So that might be something you care about, or it might be something you really don't care about. That's up to you. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I want to use another brush, and I'm going to use a little bit deeper color here with this brush, but I'm going to add some solvent. I'm going to add some Terpenoid to this. And I'm doing this right on my plate.
So you dip your brush in the Terpenoid, or you put the Terpenoid on the plate?
What I did is I first put the paint on my brush, and then I dipped, I put the paint then onto the plate, and then I dipped into the Terpenoid.
Just jumping in to give everybody it's 20 of 11:30 right now.
It's 20 of 11:30. What do you mean?
It is 11:10.
Oh, it's 11:10. Okay. So we have 20 minutes, in other words.
Yeah.
Okay. We're on the fast track, folks. Thank you for that heads up.
We can push it to 11:40, but that is our limit today. So giving you guys
Okay. Well, we don't want to stress you out. I know you have another meeting to get to, so we'll be respectful. Okay, so as you can see, this is also a little bit different. Now I can even add a little bit more, and I can cause this to pool.
What do you mean pool?
When you add turpentine to your color here, as I'm doing, I recognize that it's hard to see, but I will try to do this. So can you see how this is starting to pool?
Okay.
Okay, so I don't want it to be too wet because I don't want it to go every which way, but I'm showing you how you can change the viscosity and create some areas that are not quite as dense, perhaps. Okay. So then maybe I want to mix some of that up with some of the other orange, and maybe I want to put it over here. Again, I can come in here and just, no, I wouldn't use alcohol. If you're using Terpenoid already on your plate, then you want to stick with the Terpenoid, so you can dip your Q-tip into Terpenoid if you want to create some other things. So I'm just moving this around to show you how thin I can get this. And I'm also going to just add a spot of white directly onto my plate. Okay. So I have different levels on this piece, different levels of viscosity. This part here, the blue is very, very opaque. This is a little bit opaque. The white is very opaque. And then this had a lot of solvent put in there. So that's not very opaque at all. So once again, I'm dampening my paper. And then I'm just wiping it dry with a paper towel. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to place this down. Once again, this is a full bleed. I'm taking advantage of the whole plate. I like to use my hand first, because the warmth of your hand is sometimes a very good way to transfer your ink. And then I'm using my Baron. Now, of course, as we discussed last week, you can use a wooden spoon if you have that. Keep in mind the wooden spoon, unless you're using the round part of the back, if you're using the edges, it will leave marks for you, which may be something that you would like to have or something that you might not want to have. So think about that. So here you can see the results of, whoops, this way, the results of the different types of paint thickness and thinness that we used here. Now, there's a little tiny bit of ink here on the plate that's left on the plate right now. So one thing that can also be fun is to go back in and I'm actually going to take a cotton ball and I'm going to put it in the Terpenoid, and I'm going to come in and I'm just going to break up some space here. Okay, so this is now very loose ink. Again, I'm going to spritz my paper.
Nancy, if you want to put layers of paint, can you let it dry and then put another coat, or everything has to be wet?
No, you can absolutely do that. That's the beauty of working with oil-based inks. And I thought for next week that you can take some of the prints that you tried and made the first 2 weeks, and if you want, you can continue to add to them by printing over them. And also, I know you were very interested in adding collage elements. So if you would like, anybody who would like, this is not something that Emily did, but certainly it's a very big part of many printmakers' practice, as many of them are also mixed media artists. If you do have some collage elements that you would like to add to your pieces, you know, certainly feel free to do that. So now I'm going to have a little look and see what we've done. So remember, this is the ghost of the one that we just did, and we've just added some additional Terpenoid to it to see what kind of effects we could get. So here now we have this finished piece, which, if you remember, I actually really like the plate.
You had quite a bit of paint on the plate, didn't you, after the first print?
I did where the blue was, not so much where the orange was. So here you can see, this was the first one. Okay. Here's the plate in the center, which I actually think I like the best. And then here is this other pull that we did by adding some of the solvent. It's actually kind of nice this way.
If you've used Terpenoid in making the print, do you clean your plate with Terpenoid then, or can you use alcohol, or does it matter?
You can, I would probably stick with the Terpenoid. I just don't like to mix things. when they could be flammable, I prefer to, stick with one thing or another. So I would at this point definitely use the Terpenoid and just clean this and clean my brushes with it. And then I would follow that with soap and water.
Okay.
So let me see what time we have. Where are we as far as time? Does anybody have the exact time?
It is 11:21.
Okay, 11:21. Okay. Well, maybe what I will do is, there is another method that you can use whereby you add oil to your plate and or to your inks. So since we're very short on time, I think what I would like to do is to simply add some oil to what I already have existing here. So I'm adding oil to this plate with some paint that I already have on here.
And what kind of oil?
I am using what we call plate oil. You could use, if you have walnut oil, you could certainly use that. I like to stay away from the linseed oil because that really, really yellows. I mean, most oils will cause yellowing. That's, pretty much standard operating procedure. So I won't kid you about that. But it is effective, can be effective. And let's see, I still have some of this blue, so I think I'll add some over here on my brayer. Why not? And maybe I'll actually go into this a little bit here. So the other thing that you can do is you can dip your paper towel into oil and you can use it to draw with or to remove certain things. Now, because we're using complementary colors right now, it will get to a certain shade of gray.
Oh, I thought you told us to use Analogous Colors.
I'm sorry?
I thought you told us to use Analogous Colors.
I did, but right now I'm using this
Oh.
just because it's here.
Yeah,
I would love to just start another plate, but for the sake of time today, okay. The analogous colors are really, I think, some of her most beautiful work, although she did also use complementary, but so that's why I thought you would enjoy the analogous. So here you can see, I think in this, you see how some parts are clear, some parts are somewhat muted, some parts are more opaque than others. I think you can see that in this one. So this is going to yield a little bit of a different result. Get my water. So remember, as I said earlier, that I really want you to think of today as strictly a day of experimentation, not looking for a finished product per se. Goodness knows, I'm certainly not looking for a finished product today.
Can you
But
remind me?
just,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I beg your pardon?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you were finished speaking. I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Could you remind me how you get the plate centered on the paper?
I am going to show you that right now. Okay, what you would do first is you would take your paper that you're going to use and you would go ahead and just make little marks in the corners. Okay. Then you can go ahead and prepare your paper. Then you can take your plate and put it down in the middle of those marks that you made. Okay. So now I'm going to take my damp paper and I'm going to line it up where I made those little marks and I'm going to put it down.
Ah,
Magic. I'm hoping that this,
so you have another piece of paper underneath that.
yeah, I have a piece of newsprint and I also have brown paper on my table, but I like to have a piece of newsprint underneath me when I'm working, just in general. I'm always trying to keep my table paper clean.
Yeah.
It's just a habit.
Yeah.
Okay, so remember with this one is a combination of a ghost. It's a combination of using oil and part of it was brayered and part of it was brushed. Okay, we're getting down to the time wire here, so let's see what we may have gotten. This is my favorite one of the day. So look at the plate. And here we have the finished print.
Yeah, pretty.
That's great.
So you can see how many different iterations we went through. With that one plate, we did 3 prints. And we used different processes. Here it is oriented in the other direction.
Oh, that's so pretty.
But it's very, I recognize that my, the lighting isn't so terrific right now. It's a little bit yellow, but it really is very subtle. The print is very subtle.
Really pretty.
It's like the cosmos.
Yes, it is. So everyone, back to me for a minute. I just want to thank you all today. I will take some questions briefly until we get cut off by Corinne. So talk to me about your experience today. Did we go too quickly?
Yes, for me, yes. All I got was 1.
Okay, but that's okay though. You got one and you're working on another one, I see.
Yes.
And unless you have another Zoom call or an appointment, you can work on that all afternoon.
Yes. I will.
And I'll encourage you to do that. And I encourage you to try all of these different possibilities, because everything that you do yields something different, you know, whether you're using a little terpenoid, whether you're using Q-tips to delete things, whether you're making hard edges or soft edges, or you're using large brushes or small brushes. The options are at times overwhelming and seemingly endless, but don't let that stop you. Let that be an open door to your journey.